This module and video will go through why we use RtI and specifically using the Evaluate phase to determine what steps to take to ensure every student is receiving the supports they need within your school-wide RtI framework. RtI is a tiered system of support. Each tier can vary by school and even by classroom. Whatever academic or behavioral supports all students in a setting are in need of, that is considered Tier 1. Research shows that Tier 1 should be meeting the needs of around 80% of the students. If 80% of the students are in need of more than is being provided in Tier 1, Tier 1 needs to be addressed in order to meet the needs of all students. Tier 2 is for those students who need a little more support. This support usually occurs in a setting of one adult working with multiple students. Research shows that this support should be targeted towards 15 to 20% of the students who need more than is being provided in Tier 1. Tier 3 is for students who need even more support than is being provided in Tier 1 and Tier 2. This support is usually provided by multiple adults supporting one or two students, or even one adult supporting one student on a one-on-one basis. Research shows that Tier 3 is targeted towards 1 to 5% of the students who need the greatest support. Before we get into Tier 2, schools and classrooms should reflect on what is occurring in Tier 1 to meet the needs of all students. Within Tier 1, all educators should be utilizing differentiation and scaffolding as best practices to meet the needs of all students. If 80% of students are not responding to Tier 1 and growing academically, Tier 1 instruction needs to be adjusted to meet the needs of the students. A point of clarity on Tier 1 versus Tier 2 and Tier 3. One cannot intervene their way out of a solid Tier 1 instruction. What that means is that if less than 80% of the students are responding to Tier 1, you cannot just have more students receiving interventions. You need to go back and address Tier 1. When providing Tier 2 and Tier 3 to students who need additional assistance with specific skills, the classroom continues with a solid Tier 1 with all students. Here are the phases of the RtI process here in Milwaukee Public Schools. We will go into detail with each in a moment. Pause the video and discuss as a group, which two phases of the RtI process do you feel we as a school are strongest with are in implementation? Which two phases of the RtI process do you feel as a school we need to address and improve the most? Please pause the video and discuss. First, we screen all students 3 times a year using STAR. Classroom teachers or teacher teams should start with approximately the 20% of students who score the lowest on STAR. In addition to using STAR, a teacher should consider additional data including previous screening data, classroom formative and summative assessments, PALs, and other assessments the student has taken. All regular education and special education students should be screened and considered for an intervention. After the classroom teacher or teacher team has screened all students and determined which students should receive additional support through a Tier 2 intervention, the teacher needs to dig deeper into the data and diagnose the specific skills the student needs additional assistance with. To diagnose, the teacher should reference the instructional planning report for a list of specific skills an individual student needs to work with. The math and reading departments have also created a one-page help guide on diagnosing students for specific skill deficits. These guides can be found on the intervention page or the RtI PBIS page of MConnect. You should have also received a copy of these two documents with this module. Once the teacher and teacher teams have diagnosed the specific skill the student needs intervention with, the teacher needs to match the student to a specific intervention. Interventions can be found in MConnect by searching Interventions or located under Resources. Interventions should be geared towards the grade level the student is performing at. For example, a student currently in 4th grade could receive an intervention at the 2nd grade level, if that is where the skill deficit is occurring for the student. Once a student has been identified for an intervention, a goal must be set in STAR. For more information on setting a goal in STAR, contact your RtI PBIS coach or the RtI and STAR reports guide on MConnect. That guide is also linked on the module you are experiencing. The baseline is automatically created for students when they took STAR as a screening tool. The next step is for students to receive an intervention from a highly qualified and licensed regular education teacher. All elementary schools have an intervention block on a daily basis in which all students receive the support they need. For students identified for an intervention, they receive their intervention in a small group during this time. Research recommends that students receiving a Tier 2 intervention receive the intervention at least 2 to 3 times per week for 20 to 30 minutes. This time is composed of explicit teacher-led instruction and computer-based support such as ST Math or Odyssey. All traditional middle and high schools have an intervention course in which students identified for an intervention are enrolled. Pause the video for 2 minutes and create a list of adjectives, words, or short phrases that describe what an intervention is. For example, small group. Interventions are research-based strategies that are used with a student or group of students whose data indicate that they are likely to not meet benchmarks. An intervention is geared towards a specific skill that the student is missing in their educational growth. Accessing the specific skill will allow the student to make educational gains with their peers. The intensity of interventions is matched to the intensity of student need and can be adjusted through many dimensions including length, frequency, and duration of implementation. Students who are receiving this additional intervention, those students in the lowest 20% plus or minus, must be progress monitored every other week or every 10 school days using STAR. STAR is our progress monitoring tool for all students receiving a Tier 2 intervention. Schools are not encouraged to progress monitor all students, but to stick with the lowest 20% who are receiving an intervention, as remember our point of clarity that you cannot intervene your way out of a solid Tier 1. When having students take STAR for progress monitoring, the teacher responsible for the students should ensure the environment is conducive to student success and to work with the students so that they understand the purpose of taking STAR and students work on having perform at their best. After the student has been progress monitored at least 3 times using STAR, the teacher or teacher team can begin to evaluate the student's progress with STAR. Teachers should go on STAR and run the progress monitoring report to view the growth of the students on STAR since being identified for an intervention. Teachers should use the 3-point rule. Using the 3-point rule, the teacher looks at the last 3 data points on STAR. If the last 3 data points are above the goal line and at or above the goal score, this indicates the intervention has been successful and the student reached their goal. The teacher should decide to transition the student away from the intervention and back to Tier 1 support alone, or continue with the intervention but set a higher goal. If they are above the goal line on STAR but not at the goal score yet, this indicates the plan is working and the teacher should continue to intervene with the student until the goal is reached. If the last 3 data points are both above and below the goal line, or you have an outlier data point, you should continue with the intervention until you can see consistency in the data. If the last 3 data points are below the goal line, this indicates the intervention is not successful with the student and the teacher or teacher team should work with the Building Intervention Team, or BIT, on next steps. If you would like, please pause the video and look at the 3-point rule and talk if you have any questions. Before addressing the needs of an individual student not responding to an intervention, the BIT, in collaboration with teacher teams, must ensure the RtI framework is at Fidelity and systems are in place to meet the needs of all students. Research shows that 70% of students should respond to interventions, and if less than 70% of students are responding, the school should look at the systems, not the students. If more than 70% of students are responding, this indicates the systems are at a fidelity and the school can look at individual students not responding to intervention. This analysis should also be applied to individual subgroups in the school, including age, sex, and ethnicity. Once the systems are at fidelity with 70% of students responding to the interventions, the BIT should begin evaluating individual students not responding to intervention. The BIT should work with the teacher or teacher teams and go back to each phase of the RtI process and look at potential issues. Here are some of the potential questions to reflect on at each phase. In the screening phase, some questions to consider. Did the student take STAR to the best of their ability? How long was the student on STAR? Was other data used when screening? Was there an illness or other situation influencing their performance? Was teacher observation considered when identifying students? In the diagnose phase, was the appropriate skill deficit determined? Was the diagnostic and instructional planning report used? In the match phase, was an appropriate intervention selected? Were MPS resources used to determine the appropriate matching? Was an appropriate goal set on STAR? Intervention. Was intervention provided 2 to 3 times per week for 20 to 30 minutes? Was intervention time and environment conducive to the intervention? Were there other factors in play? In the progress monitoring phase, some questions to consider are, did the student give their best effort on STAR? How long was the student on STAR? Was the environment conducive to student taking STAR? Did the student take STAR once every 10 school days? Please have your stoplight activity handout out to take notes of potential next steps with students receiving a Tier 2 intervention. If the BIT determines each phase is being implemented with Fidelity and the student reached the evaluate phase and is not making progress, there are a few next steps to consider. The BIT could recommend intensifying the intervention, lengthening the intervention time, having the student participate in a smaller group size, change the intervention provider, or consider a Tier 3 enrollment with potential SLD referral considerations. Please pause the video and complete the stoplight activity, taking notes on these 6 potential next steps on the top, and on the bottom, discuss as a team what is one practice you should stop doing, one you should continue doing, and one practice you should start doing. There are 2 ways to access intervention data. Teachers and teacher teams are encouraged to go directly into STAR and run the progress monitoring report. This will create a graph of all the STAR tests based on the student's scaled score. This will include the goal and the intervention name. You can also go on the data dashboard to the intervention dashboard. This will create a graph of all STAR scores based on their percentile rank. You can also view whole school progress monitoring trends and progress monitoring broken down by various subgroups. Here is an example graph of a student on STAR. Take a moment and go thumbs up or thumbs down if you think the student is responding to the intervention. This student is not responding to the intervention. As you can see, the last 3 data points are below the goal line and the goal score. This teacher should work with the building intervention team and determine next steps for this student. Here's the same student as viewed on the data dashboard. As you can see, this student's percentile rank is flatlined and is not improving. This shows the student is not responding to the intervention. Here's another student on STAR. Take a moment and go thumbs up or thumbs down if you think the student is responding to this intervention. This one's a little trickier, but overall this would be a thumbs up. The student is responding to the intervention. You can see there is some fluctuation in scores, but the preponderance of data shows that the student is improving in their STAR progress monitoring. So overall, this intervention is working. The student has not reached their goal yet, so the teacher should continue the intervention as is until the student reaches their goal. Here's the same student on data dashboard. Again, as you can see, there is some fluctuation, but overall, the student's percentile rank is improving over time. In summary, RtI is for all students. For the majority of students who are in need of extra support provided through Tier 2 interventions, they will catch up to their classmates. In some cases, a student may need something beyond what RtI provides. In some cases, the student might have a disability and need additional support through special education. We must make sure we make data-based decisions regarding these students. Look at all the data to make those decisions. Do not confuse a delay with a disability. If the data shows the Tier 2 intervention falls short of where the student should be, you might consider making a referral for a special education evaluation. The follow-up module in the series addresses this case.